texture like sun lays me down. With my mind she runs throughout the night. No need to fight, never a frown, with golden brown. Every time, just like the last, on her ship, tied to the mast, to distant lands.
Rejects. And finally, back by popular demand, we got the Idaho 4 crew going on. We got Ron from New England, from Wicked Planet. And we got JJ Vance from the host of Operation GCD. It's been a while, but we finally made it happen. Idaho 4, and I think this is part 6. God damn, that's a lot. And shit still doesn't make sense in my opinion in this case. So, real quick, I'll just go around and let you guys introduce yourselves for the new listeners too that may not know who you are. Ron, please let everybody know where they can find your stuff and what your deal is.
Yeah, I'm Ron from New England. I'm the host of the Wicked Planet podcast, and you can find it on all your major podcasting platforms. Come and check us out. Give us a follow and let me know what you think.
Awesome, yes. And his show is like really tons of different type of topics, so I highly suggest to go check out his show because it's got a slew of different things that you could be interested in. Yeah, and JJ, my man, let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find your work.
Howdy, folks. JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD. Got it right there on the screen. Been starting actually doing new live shows every Thursday night at 7 p.m. on Operation GCD's YouTube, Rumble, and soon-to-be Twixter accounts this week here. Doing a live stream. Talking vampire cults on Thursday night this week. So it's generally a shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. Nice. And that journey this week is... the time I encountered a murderous Kentucky vampire cult, and also the recent Netflix situation regarding the apparent vampire cult in Dayton, Ohio, which is currently where I'm located, in and around the Dayton vicinity. And you know, it's an interesting tale because I've never heard of that stuff prior to this recent Netflix controversy of them canceling a documentary they already had in the bag. So, you know, lots of vampire stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, for sure.
Hell yeah.
Now looking for the conversation. Great to see you, Nick, Ron, and folks of the interwebs. Hopefully we can bring some new insight into this Idaho 4 case today, because it is an intriguing topic and it's never fails to bore me as far as staying up to date on what's going on.
Hell yeah. You know what's something I just realized too? I mean, I've only probably met like maybe a small 4 or 5 people. And actually, 2 out of them are on the show with me right now. I've actually personally met these dudes in real life. So,
nice.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, holy shit, like, I'm actually on a show with people I've really met. Like, yeah. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I had a good time. I don't know if people, a lot of people may not know. I mean, you know, I'll mention it when we cover it. But, like, when I went to Washington, I did see JJ a few times, man. And I had a great time. It was really nice meeting the dude. So
hottest day of the summer.
Oh, yo, it was literally the worst days I could have picked to fucking come there, dude. It was literally, not even joking, it was 93 degrees like 2 or 3 of the days I was there.
Oh, the heat index was like 110 though. It was out of control.
Dude, I went through like 2 or 3 pairs of clothes a day.
Oh yeah.
It was insane. I was going back and changing.
That same day, that bridge in Brooklyn, it melted together or something like that. They had to like hose it down in order to get that bridge moving again because it was so damn hot up in New York City. It was like the whole East Coast, I feel like, that got that heat wave. But yeah, it was pretty wild.
Yeah, it was hot.
Pretty hot. It was good times.
Yeah, sure. Hell yeah. So JJ, I don't know if maybe you kind of want to like start off, or if Ron, if you got anything you want to say, kind of new about this case since it's been a while.
No, I think JJ should kick us off there. He's got a lot of really good information, a lot of good notes. And one thing I just wanted to say is that, you know, this case has gone pretty quiet.
Yeah.
Right. So, and when things go quiet, it's usually an indication that the prosecution might be in a little bit of trouble. I really think that's the case here. You know, there is a lot of evidence that kind of points that's very incriminating towards Brian Kohberger, but when you kind of vet that information, like the whole Amazon, like, oh, we bought a knife on Amazon thing, which I think has been debunked, right, JJ? I mean, you want to kick us off on this?
No, I think you bring up some good points, Ron. As you know, we've discussed in our previous 5 installments. I think at least what I've discussed is my underlying hypothesis is Brian Kohberger did not do it, and as as the shows have progressed, as time has progressed, it seems to indicate that is indeed the fact here. And the propaganda, like as you mentioned, Ron, has been out of control in this case. In my opinion, it's been some O.J. Simpson level propaganda, and includes individuals who are also involved in the O.J. Simpson case in distributing this propaganda in both cases, including, and not even just the distributing, because Marcia Clark and Mark Furman, the prosecuting attorney, Scientologist Marcia Clark, and the white supremacist Mark Furman, who now lives in Idaho, have both been individuals providing commentary on this case over the last almost 2 years, right? So, you know, there's been a lot of propaganda, and that's kind of come to a hilt for the prosecution. That's a good point you said, Ron, that they've gone quiet because they've been getting their dicks knocked in the dirt, so to speak, because they just lost the change of venue motion. Kohberger was granted a change of venue yesterday.
Oh, he did. Okay, because I was going to bring that up. Up because I think, you know, they did file a motion for change of venue for multiple reasons. Obviously, he's already been tried and convicted in that area. So it makes sense that they would do that. Did they end up going to Ada County?
Oh, that I don't recall where the venue was getting changed to, but I know the motion was granted.
Yeah, so Ann Taylor, his lawyer, she wanted to take it to Ada County, because she feels as though she would, you know, it would be a better place to have this trial. The jury pool wouldn't be tainted quite as bad. I mean, you know, that whole area, I mean, even, you know, either state of Washington or Idaho, I mean, this is going to be, you know, more news there than it is in the rest of the country, you know, as I said, because it has definitely gone quiet. But, you know, NBC Dateline, they did that one special, was it Killer on King Street or whatever, where they just took some partial truths and twisted it all around to gain the narrative that Kohberger is in fact guilty of this. And, you know, anybody that watches Dateline is going to get sucked in with that information. They're going to say, oh, well, this guy's definitely guilty. And they're the ones that came up with the whole, he bought the knife. They reported that he, you know, they're not saying he bought a K-bar on Amazon, but they're saying he was shopping for similar knives.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right. But nobody has any definite documentation. I mean, it's not hard to get. I mean, I can go on my Amazon and look at all the money my wife spends every day there. So I mean, anybody, all they got to do is get a warrant to search his electronics and search his Amazon account. And it would tell them if he did, in fact, buy a K-bar, because they're saying that this knife definitely was a K-bar. All the way from the beginning, they said K-bar, because they found a K-bar sheath in one of the beds of the victims. Now they're backtracking from allegedly. The K-bar. Allegedly. So they're back. Well, I mean, the
no one's seen the sheath. No one's seen pictures of the sheath. It's not been shown in Discovery.
But the sheath is important because they're using it to say that they have an exact match with Kohberger on the DNA, which again is stretching the truth just a little bit. But now what they're saying, they're not saying that he purchased a K-bar or it was a K-bar. Now they're calling it a fixed blade knife, military style. So they're already backtracking from the K-bar thing.
Yep. Well, I think you bring up some interesting points, especially relative to this Dateline episode. So that was a very, I would say you had a good explanation of it, Ron, but I would say from my perspective, it was a complete work of fiction. They took so much creative liberties in establishing facts of that case in that Dateline episode that this is part of the problem and why they're changing venues is because so much false narrative, false facts is, they put out, obvious misinformation that they have to change. I mean, he's going to struggle to have a fair trial anywhere because of the national coverage this has gotten. Right. You can send him to another country and have a hard time because it's been international coverage. But that Dateline in particular, relative to the knife, I think is very interesting. So Dateline somehow knew about some sealed warrants in searching the Amazon accounts of Brian Kohberger before that was made public. That wasn't made public until September of 2023. These warrants for Amazon. Granted, they didn't produce any results. He didn't purchase any knives from there, any K-bar knives. However, that didn't stop Dateline from claiming months earlier, before it was public. So somehow they had an inside track on the existence of these search warrants, and claiming that the search warrants proved that he purchased this knife there. I say that they did that because they didn't expect to ever have to release that information months later in the unsealed search warrants. So the state continued to try to keep that stuff sealed after Dateline's inserting this completely false narrative that everyone knows is false, right? Mm-hmm. And then over time, they're continuing to lose those battles on keeping that stuff sealed. It gets released 6-8 months later, I think it is. I think it's 6 months after the fact, in September of 2023, and everyone knows that they did submit warrants, but they didn't find anything. Right. Nothing. There was no result of it. So, not only like the fix. That's what I'm saying. Like there's a larger. This is they're keeping the lid on this case is keeping the lid on a much larger situation. This opens the floodgates to something. I have some ideas of what that. We've discussed that in the past relative to money laundering, drug trafficking, and cryptocurrency bank there nearby that FTX had purchased. I still think those are very, very relevant in the discussion, but obviously it may not be that, but it's obviously something. Like something is keeping the lid on this case, because you have sealed warrants, you have a Dateline propaganda piece, you have the state trying to keep that stuff sealed, and then all of a sudden they lose that battle, and everyone knows, look, they were lying. And back to your point from earlier, Ron, I think that's why some of the prosecution has stopped talking as much, because within the first 6 months, Bill Thompson, aka Santa Claus, the prosecutor guy there in Lasalle County, who's not really prosecuting this case, he's like the guy on paper prosecuting the case, because really it's the two state's attorney generals, deputy AGs, that are sitting there with him at the table in these hearings. They're really the ones running this. So this is really a top-down. It's not the county. It's a top-down situation with the AGs. And, he ran his mouth a lot, and, he's pretty confident in his interviews, but, because he was demanding they'd be ready for trial last summer. Now he's like, oh, well, 2026, you know what I mean? And even some of the families are like, well, if he was so certain before, why is he uncertain now? And these kind of things. So, I think there is a lot to be said with the prosecution's activities and how they've kind of curtailed some of their public, appearances and statements.
Yeah, well, it makes sense that the prosecution would want this trial to go to trial as soon as possible, right? Because once they convict Kohberger, there's no need to be looking for anybody else. And I think that this is part of a much wider conspiracy. I really do. Whether Kohberger was actually involved or not, if he was involved, then he was part of this larger conspiracy, right? But it all comes down to the sheath. It's all they have, and we haven't seen the sheath. Initially, remember, it was reported that they had contact DNA from the button on the sheath.
Correct.
Right. So they're going to have a hard time getting DNA off of a piece of leather, but the button is chrome plated, so they would be able to get. And the only type of DNA
that was the third lab test, also, Ron. Just to interject real quick, it was the first two lab tests didn't detect any DNA. The third lab test by this sketchy firm in Texas named Othram Labs, which the state doesn't want to say their name in court documents. The defense has no problem saying their name in court documents. I think that speaks to the mystery around this DNA and this knife sheath, because you can't find DNA the first two times, and then suddenly this third time you found this profile, and we're able to immediately produce a genetic investigation on that profile. Yeah, I think those are the things that stick out to me relative to that sheath.
Right, but if the sheath doesn't exist,
right,
then there's no evidence, right?
Exactly.
And I mean, it started out as, and I know every episode I keep bringing up the DNA, but this is the only link, right? So I think it's worth talking about.
It is the only link, yeah.
So initially they were saying that it was touch DNA. Now it's being reported, or not now, but recently being reported, that it's an exact match to Brian Kohberger. And they never said it was an exact match before. They said that it fit the profile, meaning when they had gotten the DNA from his parents' trash can, this is the connection that they're using. Now, they took buccal DNA sample from Kohberger when he was arrested, and buccal means anything inside your mouth, basically. So they did a cheek swab of Kohberger, and there is no DNA match associated with the crime scene with anything that has to do with Kohberger. Not his person, not his apartment, not his car, not his office at the college. There was no matches there. So the only thing they're saying where there's a match is on this like questionable knife sheath. And that's why I say that is the key. That is the key to this whole thing is the knife sheath. Now
because they don't have video. They don't have any video of them, right? I mean, like that is the only thing connecting them. They don't have the cell phone data has kind of already been debunked by the defense. That's why the state's really not focusing on that anymore. They've actually advocated other evidence, right? Do y'all recall the footprint? There was the early on evidence used
in the blood,
to get
right?
the search warrant for Kohberger's Washington State campus apartment. They used that evidence to get that search warrant. They were looking for that pair of Vans shoes, but then when they found no Vans shoes, they just said, no, we're not. No one talks about that anymore. It's gone by the wayside.
Yeah, that's gone. And was the footprint, the footprint at the crime scene, was that 13-inch shoe?
Yep.
I mean, that's a big foot, right? I mean, that's a big ass shoe.
Bigfoot.
Right. Yeah. So so the whole footprint thing is gone. That's gone. Nobody's talking about that anymore. They're not talking about anything but the crime scene. And it might be too early for us to get into this, but I think it's important for the listeners to know right off the bat, the crime scene has been demolished. There is no longer a crime scene.
That I thought was one of the weirdest things about this.
It's the number one. That's number one problem.
Yeah.
If the crime scene, you can't even take jurors to the crime scene. I know that in a lot of cases, capital murder cases, they bring the whole jury to the crime scene. And This is where the prosecution lays it out. Well, the prosecution was okay with this house being demolished. I mean, you're saying they're not going to have a trial till 2026 now.
Yep.
All this shit is going to be forgotten. Nobody's going to be even thinking about the crime scene. And the crime scene is important. Unless they did a 3D model or something using drafting techniques or software where they can actually construct this house on a computer screen and a big monitor in that courthouse, nobody's even going to know. Nobody's even going to know how the house was laid out, how it was laid out.
I mean, those are valid points, but in the event of a 3D rendering of the home, I mean, that's open to the prosecution doing whatever they want to bend the details of that to interpret how they want to, right?
Yeah.
Because the way they lined out to describe the crimes in the paperwork and the arrest affidavit and whatnot and the evidence against Kohberger that's been produced by the state, it's physically impossible to accomplish the tasks that they claim. So they can't have the actual home there. That's what I'm saying. So then they can bend the digital rendering of it however they want to fit their narrative that they created. Because if they walked any juror through that home with the narrative they produced on paper, they would be like, yeah, it'd be like going to the sixth story of the Dallas school book depository there and seeing the window that Oswald allegedly shot Kennedy. You're like, oh yeah, that didn't happen. It's the same level of nonsense. Because like when you send someone through the house and they're going to hear the other people walking upstairs, right? They're like, the jurors are immediately going to know there's no way that these people didn't hear other things going on in this house. And I only base it off of statements made by previous tenants. Previous tenants made statements early on in the case to news media saying, oh, there's no way you couldn't hear everything in that house. You heard every footstep, you heard every creak, you heard every time the heating kicked on. So yeah, I think that's why they couldn't have the home.
And this apartment building or just house was so funky the way it was designed.
Right.
And unless you look at actual pictures, aerial pictures, or whatever pictures you can scrape from the internet, because a lot of those are probably going to start disappearing.
Sure.
Right. Is this 2 stories? Is it 3 stories? It's 3 stories. Oh, where's the slider? Oh, there's a slider on this floor. Then there's a slider on the back deck, which is accessible from a road that goes behind the house.
Yep.
I mean, totally bizarre setup. Like somebody just threw this place together and figured that they were going to be able to collect some rent from the college kids, right? That's all this place was. Like nobody would in their right mind design a house this way.
No.
And if it was quickly constructed, you are going to hear every single creak, every footstep, every noise. I know when I first moved into my brand new house back in 91 or 92, I could hear everything. I could, like you say, you could hear the furnace kick on.
Yep.
You could, I mean, there wasn't a single sound you couldn't hear. So, and I mean, unless they're going to put virtual reality goggles on all the jurors and walk them through the house, I mean, nobody's going to have a clear understanding of how this place was laid out, because I think it's important how this place was laid out based on, well, he had to go to this room and kill these guys. And then he had to go upstairs and then kill those people.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's just getting rid of the house.
And do it all in a very specific amount of time, less than 17 minutes. Do it right after a DoorDash delivery guy apparently dropped off some food. And do it all without alerting any of the neighbors, because the home sat in a bowl. So there's a surrounding neighborhood on the hill above them that they can hear all the noise coming up from that valley. So no one hears anything, let alone the homes next to them, right? So
and how many of these other houses have Ring cameras on them?
Well, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
That's a big part of the evidence, right? That's actually going to work in Kohberger's. It's going to work in Kohberger's favor.
Absolutely, because the state hasn't produced any of that evidence. In fact, one of the victims, Kaylee Gonzalez's sister, got on her own accord, got the Ring camera evidence from one of the neighbors. They don't specify which. And she's the one who corrected the police timeline as far as when her sister and Madison Mogan got home, because she said she got the Ring camera, and on that footage it showed they got home like 1:51 or whatever instead of like 2 o'clock. But anyway, the police didn't do that. The police weren't. The victim's sister's correcting the police timeline with evidence she went and got from the neighbor's Ring camera. That's the level of detail the police actually went to try to determine what actually went on at that house in the immediate surrounding vicinity of that home. Nonetheless, that Ring camera should yield some details. So if Kohberger's defense does not bring that up in the court and does not work to their favor, that's a big foul on their part, because the fact that the police did not do those things should be a huge win for Kohberger.
Yeah, I got to think that Ann Taylor is right on top of that. She's really good.
Yeah, no, I've been impressed. Yeah,
and Kaylee's sister is finding out more information, as you just said, than the cops are getting. Right, yeah. She was even able to talk to the Uber driver, like she tracked that dude down. And you don't hear any reports or anything in the evidentiary reports from the prosecution that they talked to the Uber driver.
Yep, I don't think they ever wanted to, and here's why. So the Uber driver is an employee of the university. The university runs that town. The university, in my opinion, has been running this case, and it speaks to the global implications of some sort of global criminality related to this case, because the man who runs the university, who grew up in the murder home, by the way, his parents owned it, that man is formerly the head of one of the largest international law firms, corporate law firms. So he's deeply integrated into a lot of things as a result of that. So I think there's a lot of very large scale parapolitical situations that are impacting this case, and I think the university's been dictating a lot of these things, because that not only is the Uber driver, the private driver, he's like he's like more of a volunteer type thing, I believe. He drives drunk kids home on the weekends, but he works for the university. His wife she's in charge of the administration section of the Moscow Police Department. So, and then again, when you look at all the characters involved in this case, from the judge to the prosecution to the lead detective, to the chief, to the clerk of courts, who's the chief's wife for the recently retired chief of police, they're all graduates of the University of Idaho. So they're all alumni of the same university in that town. So it's, it gets very Twin Peaks like real quick, if you ask me.
Yeah, there's no reason to want to try to cover each other's asses there, right? I mean, this is what we're looking at. It's almost like Kohberger was pre-selected to be the murderer.
I think so.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's what a lot of it points to. I mean, we can get into a little bit of like some of the things that work against Kohberger. I mean, even coming from his own family, we could touch on that real quick. But, when you talk about camera surveillance footage or whatever, again, we'll bring up the car. There's no positive ID on the car. Right?
None.
We've
in fact,
talked
it may
about
be different cars.
We've
They may be
talked
showing-
about this 50 times.
Yeah. It seems to be that based upon the release of what the discovery hearings they had, notably the one back in May, that they're releasing different images of different cars to Kohberger's defense team, saying that it's the same car.
Yeah,
But they can't prove it's the same car.
Well, they got the surveillance of this one car that they're calling the white Hyundai Elantra, right? But they're not telling people that this car was actually going in a different direction than what they're saying. Number one,
Absolutely, yeah,
right. So and the time that this picture of this white Hyundai Elantra was taken was not even within the timeline of Kohberger being there to kill the people.
Correct.
Or prior or post, right?
Correct.
It's just we got a white car that looks just like Kohberger's on a camera.
That's it.
Like how many white cars? White's the most popular color of any car manufactured in the whole world. And
Absolutely.
They all look the same. We've gone over this before. A Hyundai Elantra can look like a Ford Fiesta, can look like a Fusion, can look like a freaking any number of 20 different model cars.
Absolutely. And I think what's most telling was released back in the May hearing when Kohberger's defense questioned the officers that wrote the arresting affidavit, right? Brett Payne, and then the technology guy, the detective who does the technology there from Moscow. And what was telling to me was they have these various disparate pictures of a white and videos of a white car, but they don't have so they wrote in their narratives, like, we see the white car passing this from this camera footage from this business along this route at this time. And the most integral pieces of evidence they did not produce. They did not produce the white car coming in from Washington State into Idaho, even though it's in the written report. They didn't produce the video, right? And then they claim he departed going southbound out of Moscow instead of going directly back westbound into Pullman, Washington. And they didn't produce that video either. So they have these it's a magic trick. They're like, oh, look at all these different videos of this white car. Again, the defense is pretty confident that it's not even the same car in some of these videos. So they made that statement in court, and I suspect they intend to prove that. However, it's telling me that the most integral pieces of evidence, him entering essentially into the crime scene area and him departing the crime scene area, and their written narrative, it cannot be produced in video format.
Yeah, and let's just bring up one more thing about the car, and then we can move on from the car. I think we've established that that's a sketchy piece of evidence.
Sure, for sure.
No DNA evidence that ties anything to that crime scene was found in Kohberger's car.
Correct.
You really got to know what you're doing to not leave at least a speck of DNA evidence in a car. Hence why the mafia guys line their trunks in plastic. And even then, if blood is dripping, that shit can get everywhere. So, I mean, they're not even saying they found one drop of blood, one piece of hair. If this dude is hanging over these girls and this one kid, the guy there and stabbing the shit out of them, you mean to tell me he didn't pick a little hair up there somewhere? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Pick a little something up. Nothing was found in his car.
No, and if I may piggyback on that, Ron, there was no blood trail outside the home. There was no obvious entry and exit portions of the assailant or assailants, and also that ring camera that Kaylee Gonzalez's sister got herself from the neighbor's ring camera should indicate the activity going on in front of the home that showed her sister arriving home at a different time than the police were stating. It should show at least that front door footage, and if it's not the front door, then it's the back door because the assailants came in some direction. Either way, there's no blood trail in either direction. Yeah, and so and the footprint, the latent footprint we discussed before, that has gone just the way of Houdini and said poof, that we're not going to talk about it anymore. That indicates to me that the crime scene was cleaned, because in order to get a latent footprint, they had to put down a chemical followed by a powder and then lift that footprint up. It's not just a bloody footprint.
Yeah.
I mean, no evidence at all. It's implausible to believe that this crime was committed without evidence being transmitted outside the home and into a vehicle.
But what's interesting is they didn't find any Kohberger's DNA inside the home or in the crime scene, other than the alleged contact DNA, which now they're saying is direct DNA match to Kohberger. Mm-hmm. But they did find the DNA from 3 other male individuals that they don't know anything about. Who were these people?
Correct. Yeah, that is the most important part of the DNA story, if you ask me, because it's the act of not investigating those other parties, and it's the act of then comparing the other parties they did get DNA samples from, comparing that to how they treated Kohberger. And if you look at the investigation of how with the samples they did get, not the samples they recovered from the scene, but people they investigated and got samples them to admit to a sample or volunteer a sample. Those people, in fact, one instance, one of the suspects didn't volunteer a sample, and they tracked him down and got a cigarette butt that he threw out. So, looking at that, the volunteering, the tracking down to get a cigarette butt, then they don't do any of that with Kohberger. They raid his parents' house, and violate their rights as far as getting trash and allegedly fall across the United States. So you look at all those factors in addition to the 3 male DNAs that they just said, oh well, it's not important. We don't need to identify these people.
Well, I think their argument is that it was a known party house, right? I mean, the police had gotten called to this house multiple times leading up to this, right?
Right, but according to reports, they were on two of the 3 unknown male DNA samples found at the crime scene. But aside from allegedly Kohberger's, 2 of those 3 were found in the immediate vicinity of the bodies. One was found outside on a glove. The other 2 were found in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene. So known party house, sure. But at that same time, wouldn't there be hundreds of profiles if it's a known party house? Wouldn't they be getting all of these mixed samples of DNA and no fingerprints, right? They didn't do it. There's no mention of any fingerprints. They're like, we fingerprinted the door, we fingerprinted the handles of each bedroom door. None of that occurred.
All right, so there was a DNA match from one of the 3 male individuals that matched the glove that was outside. Is this the glove that was overlooked until like the next day somebody found it?
I think it was more like 2 weeks, but supposedly, that's the glove. Yeah. So that's one sample, right? But then there was 2 other unknown male samples that were found in and around the bodies in the crime scene. So I would agree with you that like maybe the glove sample's not important, but the fact that they didn't test any of these samples, I think is extremely telling to the prosecution's narrative and what they're actually trying to do here.
Yeah, well, they're trying to fit everything, just like with the evidence of what time they actually got home. Like the police and the prosecution have a particular timeline that needs to work in order to convict Kohberger.
Yep, I agree with you on that.
So if these timeline narratives are different than what they're saying, I mean that's evidence that's no good either. I mean they're running out of evidence here.
Yeah,
and I think now that they know that they're not going to be really going to trial for another year or so, like they have all this time to work more evidence in. I mean, is that what their game plan is? I think
so. Yeah.
I mean, why? I mean, there's people committing crimes and they're putting them on trial within 6 months.
Sure.
I mean, we're coming up on 2 years, right, with this?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a little excessive, I think. So. That kind of takes away Kohberger's right to a speedy trial, too, in my opinion.
I was just thinking that. How is this a speedy trial if he wanted one?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not. And I think we've all had interactions in some regard with law enforcement from varying capacities. Myself, both sides of the law, in fact. So we know how law enforcement should operate. Like I think we've all probably, Nick, you've probably experienced it, Ron. Like. Investigations and prosecutions, they generally go to, they're pretty good at it, right? Like there's a reason why the Department of Justice prosecutes like 98% of their people on, cases, because they usually don't bring a case unless it's, they know they're going to win. Right. And that's also why a lot of things, they strong arm folks into plea agreements because they know the people know like, well, they're going to get me for more if I don't do this. Right. Which again, is not a justice system. But I think it speaks to what's going on here also, because, or at least I think it's a factor of what's going on here, right? So what most people don't realize, and what the media has not reported, is there was a federal grand jury and there was a state grand jury, and they're playing games with this right now with Kohberger's defense. So they've been playing games the entire time. The state's like, well, that's the federal evidence, and that we don't have that evidence, so you have to talk to the feds, even though that's not how the law works. If the feds are supporting the state, then all the discovery requests go through the state, right? They're not, and they're like, well, and then when they started denying all these discovery requests at first, after the 13th or 14th time, Kohberger's defense has now requested discovery materials. they started like, oh no, well, you got to go talk to the FBI for that and yada yada yada. Well, what it came out to be over time is they've had multiple grand juries on this matter. They had a federal and a state, which again I would argue is a gross violation of Kohberger's rights. You can't charge him for the same crime in two different courts for the same for two different grand juries. It's not possible. It's not possible as per the Constitution.
Yeah, 100%, JJ. And here's the thing: is it a federal case or is it a state case?
It's 100% a state case. It's
100% a state case. Now, people might ask,
have no jurisdiction.
Well, people might ask, why are the feds involved? Well, because they're probably using the old "it crossed state lines," because even though these two locations are close, right? One's in Washington State, the other one's in Idaho State. That's the only.
I would actually argue,
That's the only reason that the federal government should be involved in this. And not only that, is the federal government withholding information from the state government. We all know how they compartmentalize all this stuff, right? They're not going to share information. But if he's not being tried on a federal level, then the feds need to back off. They got no jurisdiction in this case, like none. Unless the feds know or privy to information that they're not sharing with the prosecution or the defense, because the feds know that it's part of a much bigger conspiracy. That encompasses maybe that whole end of the country, going all the way down to Salt Lake City, Utah. We talked about that in previous episodes, right? This is a drug trafficking alleyway. And if the feds have ongoing investigations that they can't allow to be compromised by giving information to the state prosecution, they simply won't do it. They will withhold that information. You think the feds care if Kohberger goes down for this? They don't give two shits about that. They don't care about Kohberger whatsoever. So, but other than that, we have to ask ourselves, why are the feds involved?
No, that's a great point. Because like you said, the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution has been exercised, to which federal law enforcement agencies today can now go claim jurisdiction on a murder, which they normally would not have jurisdiction on, right? Murder between adults here. The FBI would not normally have jurisdiction, but with the instance that Kohberger crossed state lines, they can invoke the Commerce Clause and say that this is a federal jurisdiction. However, they did not officially do that, right? So there was so both of these, Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho, are already part of the same task force. They operate a dual 911 center. So every activity and every action is basically routed through a joint agency as it is, right? So they're already essentially on paper the same, different agencies, different states, right? But operationally speaking, they're the same thing. They're the same entity, right? The prosecutors and the chiefs of police and the sheriffs from both locations across Pullman, Washington, Moscow, Idaho, they all sit on the same drug task force. They all run the same drug task force. It's a multi-state regional drug task force done in cooperation between those states. That does not include the feds. The feds have a different task force in that area. They've been running it prior to the crimes, right? Drug task force. So to say that there's no drug trafficking situations going on there is preposterous, in my opinion, because of these task forces that exist, right?
Yeah, well, let's just bring it
on top of the actual crimes that have been seen as well in that area, right? That we've discussed within the fraternities, within the sororities, numerous parties being involved in large-scale drug trafficking operations, being arrested for large-scale drug trafficking operations. Some of those cases have been sealed, right? Yeah. So to say that this is essentially one local police department, right? So they're investigating it until they determine that the assailant comes from Washington State. So that at that point in time, when they arrest Kohberger and identify Kohberger, and the FBI is raiding his home across the United States, right, his parents' home, that's the point in time the Fed should have taken control of the case, and they did not. However, what they did do, apparently, is run their own separate grand jury indictment. So he's apparently been indicted on a federal level, but also been indicted for the same charges on the state level, because they ran a different. Because if you recall back in June of 2023, right, that was when they were supposed to have a hearing on the arraignment, and then the state was like, oh, we had a secret grand jury, and a week before the hearing was supposed to be on the arraignment, and now we don't have to have the arraignment anymore, right? So you can't indict somebody on the federal level and the state level and prosecute. You know what I mean? They're playing so many games here. I think that's indicative of again, the larger situation here that is going on with the FBI, because the FBI should have been in charge. They should have taken control of the case at the point in time Kohberger was identified. They're already deeply involved, right? So they're raiding his parents' home. The FBI is the party that's not being reported really, but the FBI is the ones who have developed every key piece of evidence, right? The identification of the car, the white Hyundai Elantra, the DNA samples, right? This is all stuff done by the FBI. So again, they're playing all these games behind the scenes. They've done these multiple indictments and grand juries. They're not giving over the evidence to the state. So to your point earlier, Ron, is the state being left in the dark? They probably are. There's no reason to tell them, right? The FBI is just like telling them to shut up and color as far as these discovery requests go.
Yeah, well, I think, 4 people getting killed, capital murder case, the Moscow PD's in way over their head on this, for sure, right? So let's get into a couple of things real quick on things that look bad for Kohberger.
Sure.
Coming from his family. Now, Kohberger goes back to, he wasn't arrested until December 30th. So he was home for the holidays.
2 weeks.
And it's being reported that his sister had mentioned or talked to somebody, maybe she shouldn't be talking to anybody, but saying that Brian was acting very, very odd, very strange behavior when he was at his parents' house for the holidays. One of the things that he was doing that they found odd, and I think anybody would find this odd, was that he was wearing latex gloves like most of the time he was there. I don't know.
That does sound very bad for Kohberger. However, I'm not willing to believe any of those details unless I see
that's what I'm saying.
A signed affidavit from his sister. Right, exactly. Like a signed affidavit from his sister on video camera, like holding up a newspaper like a hostage with today's date on it, saying my brother was acting shady during the, you know what I mean? Because it sounds awful for Kohberger, but to me, it just also sounds like the same propaganda.
Oh no, 100%, JJ. I'm just saying, this is what's being reported.
Oh, for sure.
And that's why I asked.
Heavily reported.
This is why I asked, who was she talking to? Did this come up? Did this come up in a federal interrogation of his sister? Did this come up, or anything like that?
Yeah.
But it's coming out, and of course, this helps fit the narrative of the prosecution, right? That he's walking around inside the house wearing latex gloves. Yeah, that would be odd. I would find that extremely odd.
What would be more odd is if he did that after he reported to class at Washington State University, taught courses, conducted exams for the 2 weeks for the month following the murders. It'd be even stranger if he was doing those things as reported in Pennsylvania, if he went on business as usual in Washington State.
Have you ever been in Pennsylvania in December?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Might have been.
It's pretty freaking cold in December, even in
Especially
Pennsylvania.
that area.
Yeah.
Mountains.
Okay, so his sister is also saying that she thought it was odd that her brother's outside washing his car, but he's also washing it down with bleach.
Right.
Now, could this be why they were able to get no DNA evidence out of his car? Because he did swipe the car clean with bleach? I mean, these things...
It's certainly possible.
Well, this is what I'm saying, JJ. If these things actually did happen and the prosecution can use this in their narrative, then that kind of looks kind of bad for Kohberger. But
what's interesting though,
but it doesn't convict him. It doesn't convict him of anything. There's nobody saying you can't wash your car down with bleach. I mean, as somebody that's in the auto body industry, I don't really think that's something you should do. but I mean, is he wiping down his cloth interior with bleach? Is he? You see what I'm saying? It just none of that makes sense.
No, and there would still, in my understanding, there would still be evidence of former blood stains, even if you use bleach, right? Even with the luminol testing and whatnot. There's indication.
Did they mention
there was a spot cleaned up?
Oh, did they mention if it was definitely cleaning? You know what I'm saying? Who's to say you didn't spill a little bit of bleach in your car and they're saying, oh, now there's bleach in the car?
Right.
Is it actually it was all over something and it was obvious that it was cleaned, or was there just bleach found in the car? You know what I'm saying? You have to wonder how they play on that.
Right.
Well, no, and it's funny because if you look at these details that we're discussing right now with the bleach and the cleaning of the car, This is part of the public propaganda narrative. It's not part of the court narrative, right? It's not part of the state's narrative. The state's not saying. One of the other details that was released at the same time, Ron, if you remember, was when they broke in, when they literally knocked down the front door of Kohberger's parents' home. It's like 1 or 2 in the morning. He's allegedly in the kitchen wearing latex gloves again, separating his garbage from the family's garbage, which is preposterous. The idea of that is nuts. Because first of all, they allegedly used his father's DNA to determine that it was a match to the knife sheath. So what would be the purpose of him even separating the garbage? But it just, in everyone's mind, it immediately clicks, well, that guy must be guilty if he was in there doing that.
Sure.
However, again, the state's not addressing that. The state's not like, oh, we found this guy and he was doing this. Because again, that's FBI evidence. The FBI is not even involved in the state case, right? It's that level of ridiculous that they're the games they're playing with these details, right? I agree with you. That sounds very incriminating. And if the state had any intent to ever produce that in trial, I would be shocked.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is they can add this to their narrative.
Oh,
they can do this to poison the minds of the potential jury pool.
No,
right?
it has. Yeah, it has. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of folks to think that Kohberger didn't do it.
Oh yeah. Oh no. When we started putting the first episodes out after the first episode, I got a lot of comments like, "He definitely did it. Are you guys trying to protect him?"
Right.
No, we're just looking at the evidence as laypersons who approach kind of research on a different level, and we're figuring out that none of this stuff lines up. Like none of this stuff lines up. All right. Okay. So enough of what's making Kohberger look funky at his parents' house. I mean, yeah, if he did something like, could you imagine like brutally murdering 4 people and then going to your parents' house, halfway across the country or 3/4 away across the country, just acting normal over Christmas?
No,
right.
I couldn't imagine
unless you're a cold-blooded psychopathed
yeah,
like
I couldn't imagine him going to class and conducting exams and like because he was a TA, he taught classes, so I can't even fathom him teaching exams and grading exams. Yeah, in the aftermath of that,
he was studying under the lady who was a prominent serial killer researcher. She's the one that did the interview for the BTK killer. She's the one that wrote the book about the BTK killer. He's working with her. Right? Yeah. He's working with her.
Yeah, she's suspect. Catherine Ramslin, right? Catherine Ramslin? Is that her name?
I can't remember. Sounds right.
Yeah,
sounds right.
I think it is. Yeah, in my opinion, she's a very suspect individual. Speaking to vampire cults, as I mentioned previously, she went undercover with a vampire cult, and she's like, "Oh, these are just nice people. They're just goth, and they don't kill anybody."
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting show. I'm going to have to chime in on that one there. But one of the other things, that leaves more questions kind of open-ended for me, I mean, we got the whole thing. Yeah, he's acting strange or whatever. Yeah, it doesn't mean he's guilty. I mean, I think this guy's freaking strange anyways. Right?
Yeah, But he seems to be a highly intelligent and usually with that level of intelligence,
and taking the courses
to the people around him, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, other than people that are just really unique, how many people are going to take the courses that he was taking? I mean, looking into ways, this, and then the ads he put out, he wanted to interview people that knew things about, other types of serial killings and things like that. So the guy's a little strange. I mean, he even looks strange, but doesn't mean he's guilty, right? Okay, right. So let's get into something else.
Yeah, it's not guilty to be weird, Ron. It's not guilty to be weird.
Yeah, no. If that was the case, I would be guilty of all kinds of things. My niece, they're studying the Holocaust in middle school right now, and she knows a lot about it, obviously because of what I watch on TV, and her teacher's like, "Wow, you know a lot about that." She goes, "Why do you know so much about that?" "Oh, because my uncle, we watch Holocaust shows, and my uncle's really into researching Adolf Hitler." I'm like, don't tell your teacher that. Don't tell your teacher that.
Right.
You know, but
the
anyway,
teacher automatically thinks you're at home with an SS uniform on, doing some sig heils in the mirror. You know what I mean?
Hey,
I'm assuming that's the picture that's presented in a teacher's mind.
Yeah. Like, who's the teacher to say anything? You're teaching kids about the Holocaust, right? Now that people are actually starting to question whether that actually happened or not, right? But anyways, let's get into some of the cell phone data, because some of the cell phone data is now becoming questionable, also, right?
For sure.
So we have a little bit of a timeline. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. So his phone goes offline at 3 a.m. It comes back online at 5 a.m. What did you want to add to that, JJ?
Well, what are we saying by online? I've had different understandings of what they're trying to. My understanding is that his phone was not talking to actively talking to any towers. Right. My understanding is that can occur simply by having your phone in a location and not using it.
Yeah,
my understanding, it doesn't have to be on.
Or on airplane mode, right? So
on airplane mode, right?
Yeah, so that's another thing. But for a 2-hour period between 3 and 5, his phone goes off grid. Let's just call it off grid.
Sure.
Right? Now, part of the defense, what they're saying is that Kohberger, and again, strange dude, something that he would do often is in the middle of the night, go for drives.
Correct.
I mean, I wouldn't do that personally. You know, I think I'm maybe a little bit more normal compared to Brian Kohberger. But if you take somebody like that, say he's a night owl, say he's insomniac, whatever. Now they're reporting that he had gone for a drive during this whole time. And this is why they can't even get cell phone evidence or evidence of surveillance of him in his car around, that he drove about 10 miles south of there and did a big loop and came back to a town called Blaine, which I only got to assume is also in Idaho.
I think it's on the border there on the Washington side.
Because this was part of his alibi. Part of his alibi. Remember, we were waiting for an alibi, and the defense was not releasing an alibi.
Yeah.
And the prosecution was getting really pissed off because they weren't releasing an alibi. Kohberger's alibi is that, I was out driving around and I had gone down to Blaine and did a loop and came back and whatever, listening to music.
Taking some pictures of stars or something like that.
Yeah. Taking pictures of the night sky. So where is that coming into the whole picture? I mean, wouldn't they be able to now? And they're also saying, now here's another thing. They're also saying that cell phone coverage is real spotty where he went for his drive. Now, wouldn't they be able to access those towers and using metadata and find out if he was actually there or not? Because
that's what the defense is saying. Yeah, that's exactly.
Well, because if the coverage was really lax there, that's not going to work too good for the defense, right? So if the cell phone coverage was really good, well, they would be able to prove that his phone was like pinging off of all these towers while he's going on this drive, which is the basis of his alibi.
I think that's what that cell phone expert's trying to prove, right? Much like so one thing that quickly happened before the cell phone expert testified was the DNA expert, right? The IgG investigative genealogy DNA expert. That was this time last year, we'll call it August 2023. She testified. And if you recall, the FBI was at her doorstep the next day threatening her because Santa Claus Bill Thompson allegedly called the FBI and said, hey, you need to go talk to this woman. Because she testified a bunch of stuff in court that completely blew holes in the prosecution's DNA story, right? Like, well, you can't, because of the way they conducted the technical aspects of the way they claim they conducted the investigation, she's like, well, you can't do that. That's not possible. And she proved it in her testimony, and she's the leading expert in the country, used in many other cases. So they were like, oh, shit, problem here. We got to go threaten her, right? And then she didn't say she changed her story. The FBI then interviewed one of her constituents in that community and said, oh, well, she wrote me an email saying that she changed her story. So this is the level of witness intimidation that's been going on in this case. Now, when you get to the cell phone guy, the defense guy, I think what's gone on here is this. He's come up to the table to a line saying, this is what we're in the defense as well. This is what we're going to prove, right? We haven't proved it yet. We're going to prove it through the metadata, through the tower tracking, etc. That he was over there 20 miles in the other direction of Pullman than he wasn't, or 10 miles in their direction of Pullman, westbound, southwest, versus 10 miles eastbound into Moscow, Idaho. Now, the reason why they've only come up to the line is because they don't want to have to get threatened their lives by the FBI. And they also only have to come up to that line, right? They only were statutorily required to say X, Y, and Z. Well, my client was driving around. They can then later add details to that later, but they don't have to add those details immediately. And what the state's saying is we have him on these cameras, which now they've poked holes in that. We have him on these cell phone towers, which they poked holes in that story themselves, because one of those instances where they say he pings off the Moscow, Idaho tower, they also admit in the same arresting affidavit that he's sitting in his apartment in Pullman, Washington. So they negate their own story. And I suspect they did that so they could have plausible deniability later. The state of Idaho only wanted to go so far because, again, speaking to the external pressures in this case from the federal level, the state of Idaho was like, well, let's write this in a manner where we can say later, well, we fucked up. We thought he was pinging from this, but then there was that one instance where he was pinging over there, so we just didn't know. We put it all in the paperwork so to make sure we were being objective. That's their, I guarantee that's their storyline for doing that. So you have the cell phone data, but it's been completely used in a manner that's by their own admission, not doesn't really demonstrate anything, right? I mean, it is evidence, but it's not really evidence of anything because it's conflicting. It has conflicting conclusions based upon what they're trying to argue. So I suspect that he was driving around. I suspect he was nowhere near Moscow that night. And then when his phone did drop, it was probably just because he was in a dead zone. And the phone's on. It's not communicating with the tower during that time. It's very plausible that's what has occurred here. That's what his defense team states. I suspect they would like to release more information on that subject or testify more, but also don't want to have their lives threatened by the FBI.
Yeah, and that's interesting that the FBI paid that cell phone expert a visit, right? What would be their motive for that, other than to have, maybe entice her to shut her mouth, right?
Yeah, it was just in one correction that it was the DNA expert, but it's absolutely to intimidate her. I mean, that's 100% what's going on there. There's no other way around it, and the way they claimed they got that information causes me to believe they were monitoring that woman's communications in an unlawful manner, because they claim that she emailed somebody, and that person she emailed a colleague in that community. That person then emailed Bill Thompson saying, "This lady testified in your court yesterday." She then sent me an email after court saying that she lied in your court. No one's ever produced this email. And then Bill Thompson calls the FBI, and the FBI pays her a visit. If you ask me, the FBI was monitoring her communications and then paid her a visit because she wrote an email saying, "You won't believe what happened in court today. These people are out of their minds."
Yeah, and why would somebody email somebody else incriminating themselves for perjury?
Right, exactly. And then that person then contacts the prosecutor. Yeah, it's not a believable story.
It's not going to happen. And as you just said, JJ, nobody has produced this email.
No.
Right. All right.
More stories.
So another thing that's really suspect on there. One thing I wanted to touch on. Who is Jack? Jack is a person that both Kaylee and Maddie were repeatedly trying to call.
Correct.
And I have the time. I thought I wrote the times down.
Oh, is that the guy who was even calling them, I think, too, or messaging both of them?
Well, I don't know, but Kaylee had called him 6 times. Maddie had called him 3 times. Presumably, right. Maddie called him because he wasn't answering for Kaylee. Yeah. Well, he didn't answer for either of them. Who is Jack? Is Jack their dealer?
So Kaylee's supposed to be Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, right?
Well, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the story. They grew up together and they were boyfriend and girlfriend for many years through high school and into college. However, they had separated, I think, 6 months a year prior. She had already left school. She was only back that weekend. Surveillance footage was later released. That's the other tricky thing here. So we see CCTV security footage of the kids, the victims walking down the street, right, with a different Jack before, from the bar, the corner club bar, right? That video is suspiciously released at a time during the investigation in which, that causes Idaho to bend their narrative that they were already twisting, right? Other footage was later released from this is in December of 2022, before Kohberger's name's even known. Other video footage is released from the Corner Club bar where Kaylee and Maddie were hanging out just prior to the murders. And in that footage, Jack DeCore is clearly in that footage. He's clearly talking to them in that security footage. That was leaked by an unknown party to the media. The media has never come out and said why that was leaked or who leaked it. So I think Jack plays I've always thought Jack plays an important role in whatever's going on there. And that's why I think it's part of an integral part of the fraternity drug dealing narrative is because, so in my mind, the reason why they're calling 7 times immediately before they're murdered, right? Or what was it, 7 times, 8 times, whatever it was?
9 times.
Nine times. Nine times. Thank you, Ron. Is because the Kathy Mabut, the county coroner /
Lions Club,
whatever she's the self-defense attorney there in town, somehow a public defender. Strangely enough, I don't know how these things work, where you can have all these different roles like that. But she claims the initial murder time was at 3 a.m. So those calls are immediately prior to 3 a.m. So I would argue that the individuals that were in the house that committed this crime were known to. They may not have been students. They may not have been fraternity members themselves. They were known to this fraternity drug dealing network. And the reason why they're calling Jack is because they don't want to call the police, right? And they're going to call somebody else who's in the network that they trust to come help them, who lives next door. Jack lived 200 feet from this home, 300 feet, I think at max, right? So in that same cul-de-sac, in that same valley, in that same immediate area. So they're calling him. He later claims he was asleep. He had just seen them at the bar. So this idea that he immediately goes home and goes to sleep, sure, it's possible, but I don't think anyone ever vetted any of that out either. They claim.
Okay, so we're talking about this is the same Jack that's like when I asked who was Jack, right? This is the same. This is presumably the same Jack that they spoke to while they were at after the bar, where they're at the food truck or whatever. Yep. Which
no. So the food truck is a different Jack. That's Jack Showalter.
Okay, because there's so many different Jacks involved here. This is where I'm getting confused, right? So Showalter was a member of a different fraternity than Jack DeCore. DeCore was the Jack who was dating Kaylee. Showalter's the one who was kicked out of fraternity, but still hung around with the fraternity and sorority kids. And he's the one seen in the CCTV footage walking down the sidewalk from the Corner Club bar, the one that Jack that they ditched later at the food cart. So does he play a role? I think it's certainly possible. He has family relations directly into the Idaho Attorney General's office, who again are very integral in prosecuting this case. Right. So the plot thickens as far as that goes. Yeah. Do you have the timeline of when they were making these phone calls? I was trying to find that.
Yeah, I think I have it here on one of them links. Let me look here real quick.
You know, I thought I saw it too, but it would make sense that it could change the timeline of the actual murderers, murders, right? Because are they frantically trying to call this Jack individual because somebody is in the house?
It certainly seems that way, right?
Or, well, see, I don't know, because there's got to be cell phone data information that says what time these phone calls were made.
So here we go. The first call is at 2:26. Kaylee starts to call. This is quotes from Kaylee's sister, who produced this evidence, by the way. At 2:26, Kaylee starts to call Jack. Kaylee calls Jack 6 times between 2:26 to 2:44. So 6 times in 18 minutes. That's once every 3 minutes.
Little obsessive. From
2:44 to 2:52, Maddie calls Jack 3 times. So that's another like 8 minutes. So that's basically 2 minutes 45 seconds every phone call, right? Approximately. Then Kaylee makes a final call at 2:52.
And they're saying it happened at 3 o'clock.
So there's actually 10 calls. That's 10 calls. And both were never heard from again. The original timeline by Kathy Mabut was the murders occurred at 3 a.m. at approximately 3 a.m.
This is too.
She based that upon her investigation. She said her comments, her investigation into the deaths. Her actual.
I mean, what's the odds exactly at 3 a.m. that didn't happen? It's minutes off. Anyway.
No, but,
you know what I'm saying? So like these phone calls could actually be in the time when it's going on.
Yeah, well, 252 could have been when they got murdered during the last phone call. Like
and now one of them is alive, correct or no?
No.
All right. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, there's one person from inside the house that wasn't.
Yeah, but
murdered.
Not the people making the phone calls.
Two of the roommates weren't murdered, but the ones that were making the phone calls were. So, this is my interpretation of that evidence. This is what I see as most plausible scenario. Somebody walks into that sliding door, right? Murders the two on that floor, right? Zana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin, right? The girls upstairs initially hear the argument.
I was going to ask that. Were they upstairs because they had time to maybe like panic and try to start making calls?
Yeah, they're upstairs and allegedly they were, seemingly at least according to the evidence, they were in their own separate bedrooms upstairs. Kaylee was in her old bedroom. Madison Mogan was in her bedroom. And I only say that is because when the police later arrive on the scene, Kaylee's dog Murphy is closed in her bedroom. The door's closed. The dog's in the bedroom, right? So Kaylee's found deceased in Madison's bedroom. So what I presume occurred is that the argument, something they could have even been downstairs when it initially happened, right? Because I assert that this is somebody within the drug trafficking network that they all knew, and they had a reason to trust, right? However, maybe they didn't realize they no longer had a reason to trust, and then when they realized that, it was too late. So the girls are upstairs. Zana and Ethan get murdered downstairs, and in the entry floor level, the second floor, but it's the entry level from the sliding glass back door. So that's why they're making calls. They're like, hey, this dude's over here, or these dudes are over here. They're getting real angry about life. They want money.
Yeah, because I was going to say, who's to say somebody walked in and just killed people? They could have been inside that house arguing and fucking going on for 15, 20 minutes before people got killed.
Right.
I precisely suspect that's exactly what went on here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like this phone call shit's way too fucking weird.
These guys they're calling somebody else that's with it. They don't want to narc themselves out to police. They don't want to say, hey, we're part of this drug trafficking ring, right? Even though they don't realize the police already know, because the police run the drug trafficking force in that town, right? So what I'm assuming is these kids don't understand the depth of what they've been involved in, right? So at that point, they don't want to call police. But they do want to call the most trusted person they have, right? And that's Jack DeCore, who lives a couple hundred feet away, who they just saw at the bar, who Kaylee and Madison have known most of their life by that point, right? Because they were all part of Madison and Kaylee were best friends. Kaylee dated Jack. Madison had a boyfriend. They were all part of one little crew growing up, right? So I suspect they call their most trusted person Jack DeCore. He doesn't answer, but he probably doesn't intentionally answer because he's aware of what's going on. I don't think it was a big secret that they were trying to shut these people up for X, Y, and Z reasons. I would argue that it's because they were probably talking too much about something or someone or whatever, or they all quit. So all the three girls that died, they had all quit their sororities. They were no longer active members. So if you're part of a drug trafficking network that's contingent upon being a member of these fraternities, sororities, and you quit that sorority, well, I think you're on the chopping block for some sort of execution like this. Not necessarily from the fraternities, sororities, but the overarching drug trafficking operation.
Yeah, and that makes sense because in some lives, if you're a member of something, if you're a made member of an organized crime family, you don't quit.
Exactly.
There's only two ways out. One, you die for numerous reasons, but you're dead. And the other one is what they call you being shelved, which means you're being forcibly retired, but you get to live.
Yep.
Right? That's organized crime. That's
I knew somebody who actually was given money and told to leave the fucking state.
Interesting. Yep. A good example of that would be like Joe Bonanno, right? He was thrown off the head of the Bonanno crime family, thrown out of the commission there in New York City and retired to Arizona, right, for many years.
Yeah.
I believe that'd be a good example of getting shelved.
Okay. Right. But he was a higher up. So
you're talking about the lower levels.
I'm talking from capo level down.
Gotcha.
Right. So 9 times out of 10, you're just going to have an accident, hunting accident, deep sea fishing.
Car accident.
deep sea fishing accident, car accident, your car ignites and combusts very quickly.
Goes boom.
and things like that. So if you're an higher member, then I guess, being shelved is a little different. You're just said, listen, we're going to take your action. We're going to put you on a pension, their version of a pension. And you're just going to quietly go to Tucson and live the rest of your life.
Sure.
Or you're going to go to, Miami. That was another place, or Key Largo. You're going to go down there. You're going to live out your life, like what Al Capone did, right?
Sure.
But I mean, different circumstances. But in the biker community, you don't really. There's ways to retire, right? But that's all circumstantial too. I mean, that's like. I mean, what I meant to say is, it depends on what the circumstances are.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're just an old buck and you're like, you know what, I'm going to hand this over to the young guns, the young gladiators, they used to call us. We're going to hand it over to those guys. I'm going to go live up in the mountains and just take it easy for the rest of my life, and change my phone number so the feds can, tap my phone differently or whatever. I mean, that's how that works. So it would make sense that if these sororities and fraternities are involved or are part of a nationwide drug trafficking organization.
Sure.
And you decide, like, say, if you are involved in that, because we can't say that everybody that's a member of a sorority or a fraternity is involved in any nefarious things, right? They're just, they're doing their cartwheels on the front lawn and doing their TikTok videos, right? That's all they're doing. But somebody is supplying them with the drugs that are needed. And in college, there's probably a fair amount of drugs that are needed. Right. And if they are part of that and they decide that they're going to quit, well, now they're a liability. And this is the whole thing with the mob and biker clubs. You now become a liability because you know too much.
Sure.
I mean, how many CIA agents do you know that actually get to retire? Right. I mean, just think about that. Right. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it would make sense that if they knew too much, well, now they become a target. Because all they got to do is implicate one person out of hundreds. So that means they have hundreds of, like the odds are like out of hundreds of people that at least somebody's going to get implicated. And then if this person gets implicated, well, then there's an opportunity for them to flip. And then they become evidence. They become evidence to bring down the whole organization. So yeah, good point there, JJ. That could be something that's tied into it. And then, for the people that maybe didn't listen to the first 5 episodes, right?
Go back and listen.
One of the mothers and one of the stepmoms.
Oh God, yeah, this is so weird.
We're all under indictment for drug trafficking.
Yep.
Or some form of drug trafficking or drug possession.
When it comes to the parents, there's so much weird
meth and heroin in one of the cases, drug trafficking. Multiple cases of drug trafficking.
Yeah.
Multiple jurisdictions.
And that was one of our theories before, was that maybe this was a warning, being, okay, if you're picked up from something and they're trying to get you to flip or become evidence or even, witness protection program kind of stuff, right? That only means that the odds are is that you're giving information up.
Sure.
So in order for them to stop you from giving information up, they might send out a little warning. And then if you don't heed that warning, then they're going to act on their warning. Because if they don't act on their warning, then it's just going to look like a bunch of schmucks. Mm. Like, you threatened me, you told me to shut up or you were going to bring harm to somebody in my family, but you never did that. So you're a little bitch. So these people have to act to show that there is a response to your actions.
Oh, absolutely.
These are your actions. Here's the response that we're going to have to keep you from continuing doing what you're doing. I mean, so none of these things are off the table. Like the mom and the stepmom and their drug charges, these are part of this, whatever's going on. If it is, in fact, a much bigger conspiracy, which I 100% believe that it is.
Well, on that note, Ron, do you think that that like, let's say, for example, the friends that were busted for drug trafficking, friends of the victims, right? That I'm trying to remember their names right now. Emily and I don't remember the fellow's name. Anyway, they're the guys they were seen in video footage of previous police body camera incidents at the home during parties, and they're the ones who sold the hot shot to the fentanyl-laced cocaine.
Oh, right, the pill manufacturers.
Other fraternity, the other fraternity president, right? So, like, in my mind, the parents' drug operations and drug trafficking charges operate in the same drug community as the kids hanging out there at the house that are documented as drug traffickers who gave a lethal dose of cocaine to one of the fraternity presidents from the University of Idaho, right? And that happened in March of 2023. So that almost, to me, that's still, in my mind, still speaks to a cover up. Like, they had to kill that guy because he had quit being the fraternity president by that point. He was the fraternity president, and then he quit, and then he got a hot shot and died. And he died in Seattle, nowhere near Moscow, Idaho. That's 5 hours away, 4.5 hours away. So, it just speaks to the scale of the drug trafficking. That's why I'm saying, like, I don't think that the mom, Xana Kernodle's mom, who was on multiple charges for drug trafficking at the time of the murders, she meth and heroin, multiple jurisdictions. That late, there's no way that those drug trafficking operations do not involve the same drug trafficking operations as the college student and her older boyfriend.
It had to be JJ, or else it would be a major turf war going there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's how that works. And then we even tracked it all the way down to Salt Lake City, right? Yep. Which could be the possible origin of where these drugs are, which has a direct line to Moscow, Idaho. Right. Yep. So, I mean, it's all laid out there. And this is stuff that people don't even bother to look into.
Does, not to interrupt, but does, like, the father with the hex hat, does that hex stuff doesn't that even go back to, like, that area you're just talking about too? I might be wrong, but I thought that even, like, connected to, like, some weird company like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency.
No, it is. It's a cryptocurrency, and it ties into the rest of the FTX tale with cryptocurrency, if you ask me, because that company operated out of Miami, which is kind of the U.S. headquarters of that hex company, which is kind of, I believe it did. I don't believe that also operated out of the Bahamas, though. That founder of Hex was indicted under basically the same charges as Sam Bankman-Fried, is using this cryptocurrency that he created as a Ponzi scheme, right? So there was nothing backing it. It was all just one big Ponzi scheme, no different. So the Hex founder got charged in August of 2023, maybe July 2023. So long after the FTX charges, not long after, but months after, nonetheless, to me they're the same. It's part of the same soup here as far as money laundering goes. And to find him, Kaylee Gonzalez's father promoting that, I was kind of shocked. That one really caused me to go back and look, to think that there's far more money laundering and spooky activity surrounding these cryptocurrencies in this event than I previously thought, and I previously thought that's exactly what was going on, but I think it's even more than I previously assumed.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we can probably research into a little bit deeper for the next installment in this, for episode 7, because you got this little no-name bank out in the middle of nowhere that FTX buys or has something to do with. That a lot of money was run through that bank. Now, if you're running a drug trafficking ring, you're generating a lot of cash. I mean, a lot of people don't take credit cards and Venmo for drugs, right? It's a cash business. Yep. So you have all this cash, who knows, presumably in gym bags, right? Let's just
right.
Get into the let's get into this conspiratorial weeds, as I like to call them, a little bit for this part. And banks that pop out of nowhere, very small no-name banks that, it's not, Bank of America, which I think they all do on a high level. I mean, they even bagged HSBC for drug trafficking, drug laundering, drug trafficking money, right? Sure. All they got was a slap on the wrist and, few $1 million fine or whatever. Yeah, no big deal. That's, the cost of doing business. But you have this bank that's tied in with these cryptocurrency moguls that are all in the hot water, Sam Bankman-Fried, right?
Right.
And which is located not too far from where all this stuff is going on. Was this bank used for money laundering and tied in with the whole FTX thing? Because that was nothing but a money laundering big fund to Democrats Ponzi scheme anyways. That's all that was.
Oh, according to the Department of Justice, this bank was used for that. Moonstone Bank, formerly Farmington State Bank there in Farmington, Washington, 45 miles away from both universities. They got $60 million seized from that bank. Now, that bank's existence and the ability to operate with cryptocurrency speaks to the volume of activities impacting these murders from behind the scenes. Sam Bankman-Fried and his associate, the guy who owns Deltec Bank, who also was the creator and producer of the cartoon Inspector Gadget, that fella, they had to solicit. So basically, they paid off some politicians to change the laws in the state of Washington because, federally speaking, cryptocurrencies and banks can't be in part of the same organization.
Right.
So they paid off some folks in Washington to change the laws. They then hired the guy they paid off as their attorney for the new Moonstone Bank and this cryptocurrency bank initiative. But yeah, it's absolutely used for money laundering. The one thing I like to focus on also in regards to this cryptocurrencies, whether it be FTX, whether it be this Hex cryptocurrency, or whether it be the private DNA lab that produced all the DNA evidence in this case, Othram Labs, they were all funded by Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank is the bank was one of the largest bank failures in America that collapsed in March 2023. So it's almost like a domino chain series of events that are associated with these things. As far as the murders occur. The murders occur again within 48 hours after FTX files bankruptcy. So if they were money laundering in that bank in Washington that was owned by FTX, be a good reason for the impetus behind these murders, because FTX just made it public less than 48 hours prior to the murder that they owned that bank. Nobody knew before that they had financed that bank until they filed their bankruptcy.
Nobody had any idea that there was a connection between that bank and FTX.
Zero.
And it's just this little random bank out in the middle of freaking nowhere.
They dumped hundreds of millions of dollars through.
Yeah.
Just looking at I've looked at the FDIC reports. I mean, they're just looking at that. Like, if you're the FDIC or any other regulatory agency, and you see a bank suddenly have an increase of thousands of % increase in deposits over a month, and you're going to tell me that doesn't trigger any red flags for money laundering, So the evidence is clear. What's going on here? It's clear to some people. You know what I mean? Some folks know exactly what has occurred here, right? Like, regarding the money laundering, the cryptocurrencies, the murders to cover it up, et cetera, et cetera. But all of these narratives we've discussed, all of this propaganda, in my opinion, is simply to hide all of those details.
Yeah. This all goes. This could technically go all the way back to FTX. I
think it does. I really do.
Right. I mean, FTX was just in the news too. Something they're trying to settle something for something to do with Robinhood, which is another scam. A lot of people invest, buy their stocks and stuff through Robinhood. My recommendation: get your money out of Robinhood, because Robinhood had a connection with FTX also.
Yep.
And remember the whole thing when Robinhood kept stop trading, would always stop trading because they knew they were going to become insolvent. It was going to be the version of a bank run with a exchange, right?
With all the GameStop, the AMC stocks.
Perfect example. Example, because Robinhood was part of that too.
Absolutely.
But Robinhood was tied in with FTX. Now, FTX is trying to, I think they just got okayed to do this, to make like a $16 million payment to Robinhood or something like. So I got to look into. This
is part of the bankruptcy.
Like 10 minutes before we went on air,
That's how it happens,
came across that story. Like, I don't have enough time to read this and decipher
I can't figure this out yet.
But yeah, that was just in the news today.
Well, I don't know that anyone has a full understanding of how much money was funneled to Ukraine through FTX, but it's astronomical. So they were a money laundering outfit for a lot of different things. And on that same note, what caused FTX to file bankruptcy to fail was actually a competing coin, Binance, this Chinese firm, cryptocurrency.
Oh, the Binance exchange, yeah.
Yeah, they're identical to FTX the way they operate. I believe Binance is under charges as well now, as similar to FTX. But they're the ones who set off the FTX thing. So had they not bought a bunch of FTX coins with their own money or something like that, this is all made up coins. There's no actual currency. There's no actual assets. These are people just saying like, oh, I'm going to put all these numbers on the computer. I own all these cryptocurrencies. Then I've invested in theirs. And then he sells off all the FTXs to then crash FTX. That's allegedly how it all went down. Now, again, so there's obviously this large scale worldwide cryptocurrency situation behind the scenes here between the HEX, the FTX, the Binance, the Ukraine money laundering, the American federal politician money laundering with FTX, which I think was in the tune of like $60 million.
Yeah, funneled back to
change.
Funneled back to Democratic campaigns in the midterm elections.
Yep,
that's documented. That's not a conspiracy theory. Yeah.
And I think the 60 million is chump change in whatever was laundered through Ukraine.
Oh my God, yeah, 60 million is nothing in the big scheme of what's going on here. So this whole thing, I mean, even has roots in Ukraine. Everybody knows Zelensky kicked a bunch of that money back to Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yep.
Because Ukraine knew that it's imperative for them to have Democrats in power for them to keep getting funded. Right. So these are all the tentacles, as they say. The tentacles of this case of 4 people getting killed in Moscow, Idaho. And I hope the listeners take the time to take just some nuggets of what we've provided them.
You actually
look into it, because this isn't just a case of some dude going cuckoo to get his rocks off and goes and kills 4 people.
I don't think so.
Not even
that's what the prosecution wants you to believe. Now we've been through a lot since the beginning of 2020. And a lot of the things that when we were first talking about it were deemed conspiracy theories. We're running about a 90% average here. We're like batting 900 here.
Yeah, right. For real.
So, none of us are professional investigators. Well, JJ might be. But
formerly I'm retired.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is take a little bit of what we're telling you, go back, like Nick says, go back to all the other episodes. Just if you got nothing to do, turn off your Netflix and listen to some episodes, right? And take all this information, and if it doesn't turn a light bulb on in your head, then just give up. Give up. Go get your job at Walmart and just get your EBT card. Do whatever it is. Go do that, because you're not helping us in any way.
You're funny. But yeah, I mean, I will agree with you. I do think, a lot of things I think a lot of people will look at as conspiracy. I mean, but this stuff's real. You know what I'm saying? You just have to start wondering, like, there's all this stuff that's around it, stuff with the parents. Again, like the silly thing of the Hex hat on. I just find that weird. Like, it's just like how many different weird things you need around this situation,
right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Like this shit was in the thick of it before. When he was wearing that hat.
Yep. He's on every news channel giving interviews about the death of his daughter, wearing that hat for multiple interviews. And that's 8 months prior before the Hex founder, the Hex executives were indicted.
Yeah, very weird stuff.
No connection there.
Yeah, totally normal.
I hate to do this, but unfortunately, because I have another show coming up in a half hour live, I do have to cut this short. So sorry, guys. But I definitely had a great time, and I'm sure there's probably actually more that we could still talk about and actually do another episode fairly soon. So I'm definitely down to talk more with you guys about it again. So
yeah, this show was long overdue for sure.
Yeah, and like there was even tons of stuff JJ has that we didn't even touch on. So I mean,
yeah. Well, we got time. We'll do an episode 7. We can keep going indefinitely. I mean, now they're not even going to go to court till 2026. I mean, we got time.
Yeah. That's so weird.
And then how many shows can we do after that? Right?
Yeah. Right.
It's like, I told you. Like that meme with Leo DiCaprio pointing, I told you.
Yeah. Exactly. Be like David Icke was right.
I think we covered some more interesting stuff, some different things, kind of different angles from the last 6 episodes. So yeah, really interesting. I want to thank you guys for inviting me to come on again.
Hell yeah.
Oh, great combo, Ron. Appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess
thanks to you both.
Hell yeah, no, thank you.
But I have one closing comment. If I can just put a bookend on some of the things I've discussed here today.
Sure.
You know, I think again, speaking to the magic show that I assert that the FBI and the state is trying to perpetrate here to prosecute Kohberger. You know, a lot of magicians' distractions. Look at this shiny object that means nothing while we're doing all this shady stuff over here, that kind of thing. Well, back in May, when Brett Payne, the lead detective for the Moscow PD in this case here, when he took the stand to testify about his arresting affidavit of Kohberger, you know, Kohberger's defense team really tore that apart. And I think one of the most important things I think that speaks to this magic show that I'm talking about here is he testified. So we've discussed in the past with this regarding the white Hyundai Elantra that the Washington State guys, a couple of Washington State University officers identified it. They allegedly, according to the arresting affidavit, it reads as if they then notified Brett Payne about it, but that happened. But in between those dates, so that's November 28th, they identify it. Moscow PD on December 7th tells the entire world we're looking for a white Hyundai Elantra, and Brett Payne allegedly starts investigating it shortly thereafter. Now, the arresting affidavit reads like they were all working together. However, when Brett Payne took the stand, he claimed not to know anything about the phone calls and communications from Washington State University officers that identified Kohberger's car on November 28th. He then claims that he didn't hear about that until after he independently identified Kohberger as a suspect. So he then claims, like, after December 7th, he then identifies Kohberger as a suspect, and then a couple of days later learns that the Washington State officers had done that 3 weeks prior. Mind you, again, this is one department. They can claim they're not the same department. They function operationally as one department. The NFL, for example, the NFL has 32 teams, right? It's the new start of the NFL season. The NFL is one team. It's one 32 team, equal profit sharing operation. They does not matter any aspect of it. If any team does better than the other, the only thing that matters is if the 32 owners can come up with a narrative that produces the most amount of money because they all split it equally. When Tom Brady sells a jersey there in New England, Ron, the owner of the Miami Dolphins, one of his opponents, you know, for many years, he gets the same equal cut as the
gets a cut, yeah, because it's NFL branded, yeah, for sure. Yep.
Same equal cut.
Wow.
Now so outwardly that's 32 different teams. Inwardly and operationally that's one team. They all work together in one purpose.
Right.
Same thing goes with Washington State University, Pullman, Washington, Moscow PD, and University of Idaho PD. Or the Moscow PD portion of the University of Idaho in that capacity, because they have a separate police force on the Washington side. Moscow does the campus police on the Idaho side. All of these organizations are one, the county and the city PDs and the campus PD, they're one operational unit. They have the joint 911 center. All of their leadership sits on the same board together on these drug task force, et cetera. So to imply that in the largest murder case in any state, you know what I mean? Well, maybe not in any state, but in that area of the state from Washington, and in the largest murder case in the state of Idaho history, you mean to tell me that within the same law enforcement organization, they didn't share these details?
Right.
They wrote a report claiming that they did. When testified later, oh, these were all independent discoveries. No, they didn't tell me that. 3 weeks had passed by. We released these press releases. That's preposterous. This is part of the magic show. That's one law enforcement organization. They operate they don't operate independently. They were one organization prior to these murders. They'll be one organization after these murders. That's kind of my my closing statement.
It's definitely
100%, JJ. Yeah, agree 100%. Yep.
Well, thank you both again. I really had a great time. Like I said, it was nice to finally catch up and do this again, and we definitely should do another one sooner. Yeah, so...
Texture like sun lays me down. With my mind she runs throughout the night. No need to fight, never a frown. With golden brown, every time just like the last on her ship tied to the mast.